Oh boy, guess what I get to do again? Get to do another video on a leftist domestic terrorist killer. Isn't it weird that some of the highest death toll killers we have no known motive for, like the Mandalay Bay shooter or the Sandy Hook shooter, who was just quote unquote depressed, but we know exactly what was wrong with the Dayton, Ohio shooter and the Boulder shooter, and guess who's up next? That's right, it's the Parkland, Texas shooter, Salvador Rolando Ramos, an illegal alien, a transgender, gang affiliated Mexican immigrant, an illegal one. Wow, how is the left going to spin this guy? This guy is all over the internet posting himself in skirts, in wigs, dresses and stockings, your classic transgender paraphernalia, as well as posting the two AR-15 assault rifles he brought to commit this attack. He killed his grandmother, two school teachers, and I believe 18 innocent children cooped up in a classroom during the lockdown. I personally don't know 100% if these lockdown procedures that they've been teaching us since I was a little kid in school are worth a damn. Ever since Columbine, just basically huddling everybody into one zone where the shooter can very easily just get in the room and spray you all down. I don't know. Maybe it's better than kids chaotically running through the halls, but at least Texas cops did kill this guy. He was not able to surrender to police or didn't choose to, one of the above. But keep in mind, this was not a right-wing person. This was not a Nazi. We know almost exactly who this person was because they posted on Reddit and 4chan. They had posted on the LGBT board of 4chan, which is not a right-wing space. You're thinking of politically incorrect or possibly B, the random board. LGBT is a very, very, very left-wing place. And there are actually no shortages of pro-trans shills and trying to, blame shifters, and of course federal agents trying to, incite people and distract people from mentioning this person's name. Rolando Ramos, Salvador Rolando Ramos, transgender, illegal immigrant from Mexico, male to female. How are you going to spin it? You couldn't spin Dayton. You couldn't spin a lot of these recent shooters. You couldn't spin Waukesha, Wisconsin, where a black guy ran down a bunch of children. Now you got your own kind shooting up children with AR-15s. Is that the gambit to say, well, now nobody can have AR-15s because everybody's shooting up people with AR-15s? Well, I'd meant to do a video and had actually recorded multiple videos on the Buffalo shooter and how that shooter was very eerie. I actually went over that shooter with a friend of mine, the Iraq War vet guy, and I've read his entire 180-page manifesto, and I've watched the video. And according to my friend who did 2 tours in Iraq, said that he believed that this 18-year-old kid, who was the Buffalo shooter, behaved like somebody with 4+ years of combat training, is the way he described it, which is eerie. The fact that he had an arsenal worth several $1,000s, which is eerie. The fact that he claims to have been a communist up until 2 years prior to the attack and then randomly pulled down every old school poll infographic you could find on race realism, on Jewish influence in media, on all the other usual stuff that you're not really allowed to talk about on YouTube, and just even bringing up is probably putting me on a list. When of course, we don't fail to talk about these things. We just, for the sake of clarity, especially given this tragedy, I'm just going to outright say that the guy was an anti-Semitic, at least according to his manifesto, was a far person. The thing that was weird about the Buffalo shooter is he was in the area where George Soros lives. He was in the area of like a Democratic poll office or something like that. So, all these left-wing targets, and he drove 4 miles away from his location to shoot up a store. And keep in mind, he identified, of course, as the nameless dudes, we're not going to name them twice, as the perpetrators of white replacement and white genocide and great replacement theory. And there we are, probably got the Wikipedia thing at the bottom, if not already banned. And he mentions all that, but then he says, we can worry about these elite later. The imperative, according to the Buffalo shooter, according to his manifesto, was to kill as many black people, just random black civilians as possible. I've never met any person of any right-wing persuasion that thought that was in any way morally correct, tactically anything, that it was any kind of solution to any kind of problem as we see it or don't see it. That seemed like the glowing brighter than the sun, like Green Lantern summoning a second green sun that they glow in the dark. You hit them with your car, you run them over. Those CIA NWAs. So anyway, so this guy, 30%, actually I think almost 1/3 of his manifesto was a shopping list of not just the guns and the parts of the guns that he owned and where he got them. And I know several people who have gotten what the Buffalo shooter got, which, by the way, is what Biden calls a ghost gun. Ironically, right around the time he wants to pass legislation against these, what they call gun kits. You buy the upper part of the gun. You get the grip, the stock, the whole trigger mechanism. I forget exactly what it's called. Sue me, gun guys. And then you got what they call the 80% lower, which is an unfinished, unmilled receiver, which when you receive it is functionally an aluminum paperweight. But if you drill the entire mag section out, you drill the trigger section out, you drill the holes where the safety mechanism goes, you put it all together with a relatively simple mechanism on the inside, and what you have is a functioning Armalite platform Model 15 rifle, which is a semi-automatic sporting rifle. It is not an assault rifle. Every time anybody says assault rifle, and at this point they've been corrected so many dozens of times, unfortunately, that anybody who uses the term assault rifle or warlike rifle or same rifle that the military uses is knowing and willfully lying. But of course, all progressives, Democrats, leftists, and communists ever do is lie 100% of the time, without exception. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've said that, but that will never stop being true. That is an axiomatic law of the fucking universe. An Armalite sporting rifle is not an assault rifle. It is not comparable to M4s or M16s that have been used in military combat service. It cannot fire in burst or automatic mode. The only selections on it are fire in semi-automatic or safety. It is essentially a very, very long pistol that fires a round that goes a lot faster but is not a lot bigger than a 9mm handgun round. That's how an AR-15 works. But those are the scariest thing in the universe. Well, let me tell you, wait until some kid shows up to one of these events with a shotgun again, like what happened in Columbine. You'll see what real carnage is. If they just take a birding shotgun to school, you'll see what real death looks like. It's very different. Okay, but let's not get into those gory details. Let's look at these two things. You got a kid who attacked immediately his own family and then I think a school he's been to. Okay, but he's a young adult, an actual adult, and he targeted mostly, I think, kids between the ages of like 7 and 14 or something. I'm not entirely sure the age makeup of the school, but he killed a lot of children. 18 underage people, 3 adults, one of which was his own grandmother, versus this one guy who writes this cartoonish manifesto that, keep in mind, when I said it listed everything that he'd bought, it's like a list of things gun grabbers want to ban, like strobing flashlights, laser sights. Of course, in New York City, where the Buffalo attack occurred, it's illegal to have a magazine longer than 10 rounds. And I think they actually force receivers and magazines in that state to be shaped a certain way so that you can't just keep slapping 30-round magazines into the gun. At least I think that's true, because the guy claimed, quote, in his manifesto, that he legally modified his weapon to take, and here I can show you what it looks like, because I believe I have the same object here. Oh no, I have it packed in my bag. But it's basically an aluminum from Palmetto State Armory, which is in the state of Florida, where I live, an aluminum 30-round magazine that's about yay big and holds about 30 rounds. The rounds are not very large. They're about the size of your pinky, okay? So, and I mean, that's the whole cartridge. It's about yay big. The round is about yay big. You understand? Now, yes, so many people have been committing attacks with these weapons, and I find that very strange that nobody's using handguns anymore. Because keep in mind, up until the Mandalay Bay shooting, the most devastating shooting attack, terrorist attack that had ever happened was the Virginia Tech shooting, which was perpetrated by a psychotic Asian incel with a pair of handguns and several magazines. I forget if he had a Beretta or a Glock or something like that, but he had 2 handguns. You know, he filmed himself before doing the attack, doing the hitman poses and shit. The AR-15 is just the soup du jour right now, and probably part of the reason why the whole AR-15 thing is, if you were going to be a first-time gun owner, and I know many, a lot of people choose the AR because it's a sporting rifle. You can go hunting with it. You can go plinking with it. It's got more oomph for self-defense. Because let me tell you, most handgun rounds, unless you're working with magnums, not a lot of stopping power. And honestly, with the AR, depending on whether or not you're using hollow points, not a lot of stopping power. But either way, you hit somebody in the right artery, the right organ, they're dead, regardless of what kind of firearm you're shooting. You can kill somebody with a single shot, a lucky shot with a 22 at relatively decent range. Okay, maybe 50 yards. The AR is pretty damn lethal up to 1,000 yards. If it hits you, it's not an easy shot. So some people fear that part of the gun, that it's more powerful, which is in some ways yes, some ways no. It depends on the round. Because let me tell you, if you send a fully jacketed supersonic round, it's unlikely to deform and cause massive damage to the body. It's going to probably go right through them and fuck up whatever's behind them. That's technically also what armor piercing or plus P or hot rounds, they call them SS-109, whatever. There's a number of different terms and a number of different kinds of supposedly light armor piercing rounds. Okay, what you're normally going to see with somebody who's actually using a weapon for self-defense purpose in virtually any gun, including handguns, is what's called a hollow point. And when it hits somebody, the bullet deforms, mushrooms, turns flat and larger, and therefore rips bigger holes in you, more likely to bounce around in your body and cause more massive damage, okay? So hypothetically, I could fuck you up worse with 9mm hollow points than just steel-jacketed target rounds from an AR-15, depending on distance. I didn't mean to go on a long diatribe like that, but I mean, let's look at this from a political outlook. I was kind of avoiding this, okay? So look, the government won't talk about BLM murderers, of which there has been many. BLM will not talk about pro-immigrant anti-ICE murderers, of which there's at least been one arsonist and another murderer. BLM will not, the media will not talk about the Dayton, Ohio shooter, which was Antifa affiliated. They won't talk about Ramos here, the Texas shooter, because he's transgender and openly left-wing. They won't talk about the Waukesha guy, who, even though he also killed children with a fucking car and just tried to claim it was an accident and wouldn't put his name on the news or his face because he's black with dreadlocks. Have you noticed that nobody's telling you the truth right now, and even Republicans are trying to downplay what's happening? It's been a long time since Charlottesville, boys, you dark MAGA crowd, where one guy, who, by the way, James Fields, the supposed Charlottesville killer, while fleeing from an Antifa protester who was armed with an AR-15, I believe. It might have actually been an AK-47 Kalashnikov assault rifle, although those legally would be semi-automatic here, and therefore it's not fair to call it an assault rifle, but it is a much higher caliber, much meaner fucking gun than an AR. An AK is. It fires a way bigger bullet, 7.65 by I think 45mm. I forget. I don't know shit that much about bullets. I'm just kind of learning now. That is way bigger round, does way more damage. It goes through cars like Swiss fucking cheese, unless it's hitting the engine block, okay, folks? He fled from one of those people, hit a woman who was in the street, a woman who probably weighed upwards of 500 pounds, a whale. I forget her name, and I don't really care to remember it, who did not die of the injuries from the car accident, but from a heart attack she received, because despite being in her 20s, she was a whale, and of course had received a great bodily stress that caused her to go into cardiac arrhythmia. That's how she died. James Fields, for this one incident that I believe in my heart of hearts was an accident, has been sentenced to 112 years in prison for like hate crimes, for domestic terrorism, all this shit. And if you've ever seen the video of the hit and run, I guess you could technically call it, which is a crime, and manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter, which is a crime, and this kid probably should have got 5 to 10 years in prison. He received 112 years in prison for what he did, and you can clearly tell in the video that he did not deliberately hit this woman. If you've ever reviewed James Fields' court case, it is a horrifying kangaroo court where the defense was denied crucial evidence that was made available to the prosecution. The defense was not allowed to call witnesses who were present in the vehicle James Fields was driving. I mean, all of the above. So I would tell you that if you were some sort of far-right angry activist person, I'd tell you kind of what the dark MAGA king himself, the ultra MAGA king Trump, told you. Stand by, stand down. The federal government wants terrorism. And if you ask me, at least when it comes to the Buffalo shooter, where terrorism doesn't happen, and especially when it comes to January 6th, where terrorism doesn't happen when the government is looking to pass anti-white supremacist terrorism laws, there's 2 on the books right now, looking to ban the kits, the build kits, the so-called ghost guns, the 80% receivers and upper and the whole AR-15 kit, that is not, by the way, if you sell something like that to a person, it is considered like a kit. A paperweight and a tube and all that shit. Now, once you manufacture it, it is now legally a firearm. However, because of the way you purchased it, it's not on a registry, which is what Joe Biden's very upset about. They can't monitor you through the ATF and the FBI and the CIA, at least not easily, if you purchase one of these. I will tell you that if you purchase one of these and assemble it into a functional firearm and then attempt to transfer ownership of that weapon, whether you give it away for free or sell it, you are then committing a big fucking time felony. I will let you know that. If you own or anybody you know owns one of these weapons, be aware of the law when it comes to these firearms. However, just owning it unregistered is not a crime. Okay? I know no shortage of people who have these. And we don't talk about that shit on the internet. We might show each other. We won't talk about it to you. Now, the Buffalo shooter guy qualifies as an instigating false flag, hypothetically, for 3 major pieces of gun grabbing and rights restricting and free speech eliminating legislation being pushed by Joe Biden. Ramos here, the transgender, far leftist, illegal Mexican alien, illegal alien, not legally allowed to be in the United States, has killed 18 children and 3 adults in the state of Texas. And all anybody wants to talk about is the gun, and the school, and the children. When you get a Rittenhouse, when you get a Dylan Roof, when you get a, what the fuck is the name of that asshole who shot up the Batman Dark Knight Rises screening in Aurora, Colorado, the orange hair, I forget that ass clown's name. One of these guys shows up, you know his name, you know his face, we don't talk about his gun. We don't talk about the expansive armory of fucking weapons that asshole Aurora shooter brought to bear in that thing. We talk about him. Wakusha, we don't talk about at all, that was a black guy. Dayton, we don't talk about it at all. That was an Antifa far leftist who was on all social media, which of course is always immediately scrubbed. And keep in mind, the reason why I know what I know now is because of 4chan, because 4chan grabs shit fast, because, social media bans accounts like this fast. But Ramos here was also on some transgender dating sites. So, the picture in the thumbnail is confirmed to be him. You may see some photos that look like this person holding a transgender flag. To my knowledge, that is not Ramos. To the best of my absolute knowledge, the photo in my thumbnail is Ramos. This is the killer. He was killed on scene. No motive given for what he has done. Do we need to know one? I'm going to tell you something, and this, beyond all the cuss words, beyond all the words about guns and terrorism and current events that always gets people banned, here's the thing I'm going to tell you that's most likely to get this video wiped the fuck off the internet. There's actually 2 kinds of transgenderism. There is one that is, I believe, directly related to homosexuality. It is not really gender dysphoric. It's a sexual fetishistic behavior. Actually, they both are. Unfortunately, I have to describe them as such. Both forms of transgenderism are sexually fetishistic behavior. However, these homosexual versions of transgenders tend to be attracted to men, and I'm talking, of course, of male to females, which is the primary kind of people we're normally talking about in this regard, unfortunately. And they're generally not severely mentally ill. They might have some disorders. Then you get what Ramos was, and you can tell just by looking at him. And of course, this is not a medical diagnosis, and I'm not legally or any way licensed to give medical diagnosis. This is an armchair guess sort of analysis of this person. That is, he is an autogynephilic transgender person. These people are actually normally sexually attracted to women. They, male to female, they usually don't pass, and they're usually sexually gratified by the thought of themselves as a woman. And they may participate in bisexual activities with men in order to complete their concept of themselves as a woman, especially since they usually are the people who are most likely to eliminate genitals. They're also the people who are least likely to pass. They're the people who are absolutely much more often than not, more than 80% of the time, comorbid with histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, borderline personality disorder, bipolar, manic depression, suicidal ideation, and these are the people who add to that statistic where around 40% of pre-op transgender people are likely to attempt, or are statistically going to attempt suicide in their lifetime. And I believe that is related to the comorbid mental illnesses. The people who are more likely to attempt and succeed in suicide are the post-sexual reassignment surgery transgender people. Transgenderism is not a choice. It is not a fashion statement. It is not a form of self-expression. It is a mental illness, and that is not meant as a slur. And in fact, I think it's egregious that we live in a world that tries to tell us that mental illnesses don't define us and shouldn't be considered slurs. But if you say that transgenderism and indeed homosexuality are mental illnesses, because they are, you will be deemed as having committed egregious violent hate speech. None of that has occurred. And in fact, what I extend to these people as a person who has bipolar 2 with hypomania, that is my own little diagnosis that I got from multiple psychiatrists with fucking degrees and lab coats. It's not a self-diagnosis from Reddit. It's not a fun disease. It sucks. I've mentioned it before. I try not to mention it too much because I don't like harping on myself. It's also unhealthy to do to my audience to be vain to you. Or poor little old me to you. Let me just tell you that it sucks. And if I, for some reason, felt the need to mutilate myself on top of having the disorder I already have, I've never attempted nor had serious ideation towards suicide, but maybe things would be different if I had that compounding severe disorder. I have talked actually and studied at length transgender groups back when I was more of a libtard around 2015. And I can tell you that most of these people who are not transgenders or non-binaries, genderqueers, or other fashion of the week fake gender people, the people who actually have the severe condition known as transgenderism, are not glad to have it. Most of them wouldn't describe sexual reassignment or hormone replacement therapy as, this great thing they've been looking forward to do all their life, but something that they thought they had to do to not go insane and kill themselves. That it was a last-ditch effort to protect themselves and to survive and to live on. Many of them regret it. Many of them do not. Many of them are glad they did it. Many of them are not. Many of them kind of like having transgenderism being a part of their personality, but surprisingly, a lot of these people just really wish they passed so they could just be a woman and never have to think about being quote-unquote trans ever again. It's a fascinating demographic. But to call them completely sane when they, as pretty much a matter of fact, no matter what, 40% of them, that's 2 out of 5 of all transgender people will attempt suicide in their lifetime. Their life expectancy is usually less than 45. It's actually usually less than 40. I don't think you should wish transgenderism on other people or think it's cool. It rather seems to be a serious condition, if you're unwilling to call it an actual diagnosable mental illness, that has very, very severe, dire, miserable, painful consequences. And it's not from you being bashed by some bigot, it's by you grappling with your own demons, to put it as nicely as I possibly can. And I'm only being nice, way more nice and way more serious than I normally am, because ultimately this whole 30-minute treatise on 2 different shootings and stuff involved, I think it was 9 innocent people in Buffalo and 18 innocent children and 3 more innocent adults in Texas. These are not people who should have been considered political targets of any kind, even though it's very clear that there was political ideation in at least one shooter, and I would argue it's pretty obvious that it's in both, but that's speculation. I've tried to be as clear to you as possible what is an unconfirmed piece of information, what is rumor, what is speculation, and what is stone cold fact. I believe I've been clear about that. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. Don't report this video. And if you do, you have to admit that you're a fucking slimy hack who doesn't actually care about gun violence. Because keep in mind, a significant amount of transgender people attempt or successfully commit suicide with firearms. And all those gun violence statistics that liberals like to try to pony around as making it oh so scary, they like to lump in self-inflicted suicide as gun violence. I don't know about you guys, but if shooting yourself in the head is violence, then chopping your own dick off is violence, okay? Self-mutilation or self-ending should not be considered violence. The major perpetrators of gun violence and mass shootings, over 80% of both, are black people. I'm sorry to say, particularly gangbangers. So for those of you who are not in an inner city gang, I'm not talking about you. Don't take offense. However, a spree killer or mass shooter is considered as somebody who shoots and wounds 3 people in either a single shooting or like 5 people over the course of an evening or something like that, a segment of a day. There's some sort of weird kind of flipsy-flopsy rules about that. Yeah, almost all of that, drive-by shootings and gangs. Almost all of it. But the government will never, or excuse me, the news, which is in fact the propaganda arm of the government. If you watch news that is delivered to you on TV, even if it is OAN or Newsmax, you are being lied to. You should be consuming your media exclusively off the internet from multiple sources. I've probably harped on that a lot. I should continue to do so. That it is imperative for you to be accurately informed, because the government always lies. The government is pretty exclusively leftist right now. And only one news corporation, which I do not believe for a fucking second is trustworthy in the slightest, is the only one that doesn't toe a left-wing party line, and that is Fox. You should not also not trust Fox. Fox is untrustworthy. They just tell the truth more often than never. CNN, of course, will tell the truth precisely never. MSNBC will tell the truth precisely never, ever. Not once, not for a split second of a single day. Never. Nothing these people ever say is true. If you are a progressive, your entire life is a fucking lie. Everything you believe about the world, how it works, the economy, sociology, the interpersonal, like, fucking psychology, everything you believe, everything about human interaction, the history of our world, our species, and our nation, and our government, how government works, how economic policy works, how geopolitical policy works, how self-defense versus aggressive, violent weapon use works. Everything you believe is wrong. You are fundamentally wrong about everything, and in the age where everything is information and information is everything, telling lies habitually and unendingly is evil. It is fundamentally morally evil. Therefore, if you are a progressive or a Democrat, you are fundamentally evil. You are not good. You're not even morally gray. You don't even have the luxury of being ignorant right now. Every single freaking poorhouse loser in the universe has an internet-connected iPhone with the combined knowledge of all of humanity on it. And if all you do is consume Hassan Piker Twitch streams and consider that your political education, you're ill-informed and you're a fucktard. And you're part of the problem. And if you think it's natural that the rise in cases of self-reported so-called transgender identifying individuals is up over 1,250 fucking % over the last 4 years, if you think that is natural, you're full of shit. And if you think it's had a positive effect on people, try going to a transgender community that's somewhere outside of Reddit, where anybody who posts even a mark of regret or a word of warning to an egg or a gender-curious individual who is being groomed by predatory transgender people online, especially on Reddit. This is very common. If you encounter transgender people who are capable of being honest outside of Reddit, you're going to get a very different idea of what a transgender person is and their effect on themselves and society. 30 minutes is long enough for this topic. I guess gosh, this was a bonanza, a 3-subject thing of multiple mass shootings, the truth about how guns work and gun violence, the government's involvement in these kind of mass killings and what they choose to report and not report in order to steer your position towards what one thing. And it's, well, fear of guns is secondary, but the one thing they want you to do is fear and hate white people, which is why they won't talk about plainly Hispanic, Mexican, illegal immigrant, transgender individuals who kill 18 children with an AR-15. They won't talk about it. You won't talk about it. And you know why you won't? Because you are a pathological, habitual, evil, and sadistic liar. And you are scum.